Okay, Marcus, thanks for writing in with your question. What do we do with inheritance? We'll get to that because that's a big question. But the next thing is, do we pay a death tax? And then ways to make this less stressful at a stressful time. So some great fodder there within such a very short question.
Yeah.
So I said at the intro, there is no death tax in Australia. There is no inheritance tax in Australia. Why are we seeing this stuff online? Nashi, what up? Like, what is it? Because I think it's worth unpacking.
Yeah, so exactly that. Is it automatic? Your day you dies, all these taxes paid? No, there's not. But when wealth is transferred between humans, whether you're alive or not, there can be tax consequences. So you can definitely spin this into death taxes. So there's a few different parts of, if I inherit the house that someone lives in, do I pay tax? Generally not. If I inherit an investment property or some shares, do I pay tax? Well, the day it gets transferred, perhaps not. But if you then sell that, maybe. So there's taxes in some of those personal assets.
But it's the flow. It's like there was no tax on the inheritance.
The actual transfer or the death itself.
But once it got into your name, if it grew overnight, well, yeah.
There could be some tax.
Yeah, or income from that asset.
And if that person sold it when they were alive, they'll be paying tax anyway. So it's not extra tax because of death. It's tax because of exactly the flow of assets. So there's those parts. Cash being transferred, no, well, generally no. There's not a tax on cash being transferred or part of an estate unless the cash has come from an asset being sold. Super is generally where this kind of headline comes from. So is there a death tax on super? No. However, can there be taxes when money gets paid out of super depending on who the person receiving that is? Yes.
Okay.
There's a big ramble of words.
Yeah. But I think what we probably need to do first is step back. And I lost my train of thought. Hang on. Just pause for 1 sec. Sorry. Yep, I'm back. Before we go any further, it's probably really important to build a foundational understanding of the two types of what they call SIS, Superannuation Industry Supervision Act. Is that what it stands for?
Good. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll do. Are you sure, Martin?
I'm not sure.
No, it is.
That's how nerdy we are.
I literally was just Googling and fact-checking myself. Yeah. So the Superannuation Industry Supervision Act, 1993. We call it the SIS Act.
One of my favourites.
You love it.
Yeah.
Clearly you remembered the acronym and all that. So when it comes to superannuation, there are two types of dependents. And this is where it can get confusing fast. I remember when I was studying financial advice, I'm like, well, this is confusing. We've got a SIS dependent. Straight up, you can be eligible to receive money from superannuation. So there's a SIS dependent. There is then a tax dependent.
And they can be the same, but they don't have to be the same. They can be different.
An example is a child or a child under 18 or a spouse is a SIS dependent and a tax dependent.
They tick both boxes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So dad dies, mum can inherit his super, no tax.
Correct.
Dad dies, there's no kid, there's no mum, the kids are under 18, they can inherit dad's super, no tax, because they're a SIS dependent and a tax dependent. What if I'm a child, an adult child over 18? I'm still a SIS dependent, but I'm not a tax dependent. And this is where things can unravel.
Yeah, correct. And when again,
but also not heaps, but kind of can.
And not with planning. And so without getting too stuck in the mud, we're talking about some components there. There are actually some untaxed components that are exceptions to that, but let's move on from that because that's pretty rare. And also even that an adult child can actually still be a tax dependent if perhaps they are actually relying upon that, there's an independency relationship or
Could be
something like that.
like they're relying on you for financial assistance. Could be a disability.
Could be a 40-year-old still living at home or exactly needing assistance from mum or dad, even though they are over 18, they still could be.
For the legal kids out there, look at some case studies on that when it goes to court. I don't remember the top of my head, but there was anyway.
So
it's wild.
There are exceptions to every rule, but we're generally saying if you're over 18, over 25, you're independent, living on your own, you can still be a cis-dependent, and i.e. receive money out of mum or dad's super if they pass, but that normally would mean you're not a tax dependent on those proceeds.
Yeah. One step further to build on our understanding of this conversation, let's just assume we've got a super fund and there's $500,000 in it. And from day one, every bit of money has gone into that super fund as an employer contribution. Not any personal contributions, not any rollovers from an old defined benefit, not some legacy product with 15 different components. Because within super in the background that you will not see these on your statements, everyone. I've not seen super statements that have the tax component breakdown.
If they are, they're on page 7 or somewhere. You're not getting that far to look at that detail.
So most people in the background of their super fund will likely have two tax components. Tax and tax-free.
Yes.
The taxed portion is all the money that's gone in from your employer, because the government has taken their 15% or 30%, depending on your income, and then that goes into that corner.
Yep. And to add to that, all of the earnings while you're in accumulation phase. The dividends and the growth, they sit in that taxed column also.
Yeah. So back to this, and I think what we'll do, we'll use an example with the adult children and the dependents and the estate, and we'll just assume that the $500,000 is all taxed. So $500,000 all taxed, whether it goes to a husband, a wife, a financial dependent or interdependency relationship, or a child under 18, that $500,000 straight to them tax-free.
Correct. Agreed. And I think just interjecting as well is that if I'm the 70-year-old who's retired, does this tax component affect me? The short answer is no. If you're in pension phase, whether it's taxable or tax-free, what you receive every week or fortnightly or month, or if you take 50 grand out to buy a car, that's all tax-free for you. So kind of we get a bit further confusing here, but while you're alive, it's tax-free. We're talking about this is important upon your passing.
Yeah. So, curveball, I'm 60, 65. I've got access to all my super tax-free. I'm 65. I've got $500,000 in my super. It's all in the taxed component. I die and I've got a 20-year-old child who's the sole beneficiary. What happens?
They're independent. They're moved out of home.
They're moved out of home.
They're living their own life.
They're now a cis-dependent, but they're not a tax-dependent.
Okay.
So they're, living their life down the road, no financial dependency.
And you've retired, you've enjoyed retirement, but unfortunately you didn't enjoy life very long, unfortunately. And so does that super get lost? No, it's your asset, so it gets passed on to your beneficiary. With your super fund, you should have a beneficiary on file. They can be what's called lapsing or non-lapsing, or you might not have a beneficiary.
Or binding or non-binding.
Exactly. So there's very different types. We won't get too... but let's assume that you've nominated your 20-year-old to be your binding beneficiary.
Yeah.
You can either do that, again, directly to them, or you can say, send it to my estate, send it to my legal personal representative, and send it so it follows the instructions of my will.
And just on that, your superannuation does not form part of your estate.
By default?
It's not an asset of your will.
Unless you intend to send it there directly, which you can do, but otherwise, we're saying in this case, you're sending it directly to this 20-year-old individual. Do they have to pay tax on the case study we're talking about today? Yes.
Okay. 65-year-old dies, 500K in super, all taxed component. Child who's 20, independent, going down working, all that. Knock on the door. Hey, your dad died. If you didn't know, all that. He's super. You're the binding beneficiary. Direct to you. How much tax does that person pay on that 500K?
They will pay 17%.
Right.
It is a flat amount. It doesn't matter whether you're unemployed. It doesn't matter if you're working and earning $100,000 or it's not. Other income in your tax in your life is a scaled system. This is a flat rate of tax. It's 17%. That doesn't sound really high, but 17% is
$85,000.
I agree. So
you're good, aren't you?
Yeah, well, one of us had a calculator. We'll figure out who that was, but that's okay. But no, so $85,000 is a large amount of money. The government goes, well, you get to keep the other 83%, but we would like to take 17% of that.
So where did you get the 17% from?
So how does that tax work? On the taxable portion, 15% is taxable. Then, if it's received personally, you need to pay the 2% Medicare levy.
Yep.
That applies. So that's 15%.
So it just falls on your ITR, on your tax return.
Correct. Yeah. So now, most super funds will take that tax out before you receive the payment. It's just to go in your tax return, and sometimes it can affect other thresholds or rebates or whatever.
Your family tax benefit.
Sometimes HEX repayments, private health insurance rebates, etc.
Yep.
So it can have a flow-on effect, but the direct tax usually happens that way. So you get the $415,000, tax is taken out, you've still got to declare it in your tax return. I think all funds now have to, but in theory otherwise, if they didn't take it out, or if you got an SMSF and someone didn't take it out, if that was the case, you might get the $500,000. Then when you get your tax return back, there's a big bill there to pay. So most of them deduct the tax before you receive it.
Now, if I'm 65, I've got my $500,000, taxed component, I die in my super, I've got a binding beneficiary is my estate, legal representative, my will. Mm-hmm. That $500,000 goes into the estate of the late Glen James. Mm-hmm. Oh, my 20-year-old child,
he's the sole beneficiary.
He's the sole beneficiary of the estate. How much tax does he or she pay if that super goes through the estate?
So does tax still apply? Yes. Some people think you can avoid it that way. No, you can't. Tax still applies. You still have to pay that first 15% we spoke about, but you avoid the 2% Medicare levy.
So that's $75,000?
Instead of $85,000.
So the question is, with some careful estate planning, can you reduce the tax burden to your beneficiaries and estate? And the answer is yes.
Yep.
Can you remove it? Sometimes, and we'll get into that. Mm-hmm. But the question basically goes back to, in theory, no, there's not an inheritance tax in Australia. It sounds good to say there's a super inheritance tax as a
big scary headlines. Yep.
If I want to take this one step further, if I had $500,000 in the super, same situation, 250 of that I put in as personal contribution.
Sold a house before
Sold a house,
retired,
250. Mm-hmm. The other 250 came in through my employer. So half the situation in the super is taxed, the other is tax-free. If I die and my 20-year-old son or daughter, same situation, gets that $500 directly, they're not paying the 17% tax on the full $500, only on the amount that has been put into super via work contributions that's been taxed at 15%.
Correct. Agreed.
So the portion that they get of that 250, that the tax has been paid because I paid tax on my income, put it in my bank account, then put it into super. It got flagged on the way into super.
Goes into a separate column.
And then it's just a rinse and repeat. If it then went through my estate, I'm paying 15% on the 250, not on the 500 and not 17%.
Yeah. So hint to that is the more you've got in that tax-free column, the less tax your beneficiaries would pay.